Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. Here we're going to talk about Spine 236, Mamma Roma, directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini, 1962. So we go from one Italian director to another. It's kind of... oh boy. Alright, the film itself, the story is basically about a mother, Mamma Roma, played by Anna Maganini, who was once a prostitute and now is interested in raising her 17-year-old son, Ettore, more properly. Selling vegetables in market and basically trying to have a more, not only a better life than what she had for many years, but also perhaps a chance for her son to be better off in the future than she was. So it's all for the sake of trying to improve her life and the life of her son. Ettore, on the other hand, ends up not really being interested in any of this, being a rebellious teenager. He would much rather hang out with a bunch of young hoodlums, and he's even smitten by a young girl who already has a reputation of being a tramp, and what you see is this sort of back and forth rise and fall of whatever Mamma Roma tries to do for her son and trying to build him up, he always finds ways to revert back or to pull down in the mud. And there's also some things that happen to her too. And in so many words, it doesn't end very well. The film itself, it could best be characterized as melodramatic realism, where there's a lot in it that lends itself to melodrama. Probably the most obvious one is having Anna Maganini star in it, and she was most famous for being in Rome Open City. I will cover that later, but just this if Visconti was all about subtlety and having some grace in forms, this has none of that. This is all about heart on your sleeves and kind of having a sort of bluntness and honesty. And yeah, you could say that this is a condition of social classes, and that's another aspect of the film. And this also characterizes a lot of Pasolini's work, especially in film, but also with his poetry. So there is that element of melodrama, but it's also done with an air of a certain realism and authenticity. But instead of the upper classes, it's now dealing with lower classes, the marginalized and dispossessed, and so it definitely works. It definitely works in that respect. It's very suited to the subject matter and everything about it. So it's also, the film itself is actually probably the best one of the best introductions you can get into Pasolini. Now, Pasolini is part of a second wave of Italian cinema, and particularly Italian neorealism. Whereas Rossellini and De Sica and Visconti are the initial generation, Pasolini is more second generation, and he would also transition out of the neorealist tendencies, but for him it was definitely in the same sort of spirit as what started neorealism in the first place. But interestingly, the thing what makes Pasolini stand out is that whereas for Rossellini and De Sica and Visconti, this was all in response to what happened after World War II. So in other words, it's looking at an Italy that has just recently suffered the ravages of war. Pasolini starts doing this at a time when Italy is more or less better off. You don't have that dire poverty like you see in Rome Open City or in De Sica's Bicycle Thieves. You get the sense that things are pretty okay. But for Pasolini, it says no, it's not all okay. And this is largely the point of Mamma Roma. That it's the notion that you can advance or that things can be better off is, it's not going to happen. Part of it is that, and like I said before, I feel that in European societies the classes are much more stratified, and it's hard to make any kind of it's more difficult to make an advancement. It's not entirely impossible, but it's not often that you can transition from one station to the next, or from one class level to the next. So not only is it hard to advance, but also there's just other things that just sort of seem to pull you into that realm, or to misuse a movie quote, as soon as you think you're out, they pull you back in. And that's the big point. So it's very, very, so the film itself is very bleak. Anyways, so kind of back to Pasolini. And then Pasolini, okay, before there was Lars von Trier, as far as cinematic enfant terribles and directors having the tendency to piss people off, there was Pasolini. And pretty much his entire career was marked with controversy. For instance, when he actually started out with poetry. And what he was especially interested in, as far as poetry, is capturing and utilizing various natural dialects that you find in Rome, which at the time, and he was doing this in the 40s or so, and at the time it was discouraged because in fascist Italy, the idea was to have a single, unified, and classier Italian language, and any kind of distinctions or divisions or distinct dialects should be smoothed over and not emphasized. And he got into trouble for doing that, but he kept doing it because he's basically kind of this sort of guy. And then his film career, his first film that he made was Acatone, which definitely has the characteristics of neorealism. By the way, I have to thank my a hallmate at William and Mary, Ben Whitaker, for helping me on this cinematic journey, and particularly on the Italian side of things. He was the one who introduced me to both Pasolini and Visconti, and found both of them charming in their own ways. So thank you, Ben, for that. And he also had an affinity for the Criterion Collection, so we were able to talk a lot about film and so forth. And he himself was and actually he did film studies, so it was great to talk with him about that. But anyways, then there's what came later in his career, where if there's one film where he has gained the most notoriety, it is Salo, where it's his take on the Marquis de Sade novel, 120 Days of Sodom. And he sets this in a ugh, I forget exactly what it was called, but it was after Mussolini was ousted, and when right before the Allies were able to reach Rome, there was a little republic that was formed by Mussolini as an attempt to try to, continue the war on the fascist side of things, and this is where Cello is set, is during that period, and there's a lot of notoriety and such with that. So this is why I say that Mamma Roma is probably the probably the better introductions, because you certainly don't have any of the infamy of Cello and a lot of his later films. His later films were adaptations of various literary works, and it was done to emphasize more of the sensual, the earth, the material, the earthy, just kind of almost primordial, and that characterized his later career. But Mamma Roma doesn't have any of that. I'm just trying to give. This is the only time I'm ever going to talk about Pasolini, so it's. So I'm just trying to present a scope of his career. So Mamma Roma is one of his earlier works, and this was the last through and through neorealist film they did. And then gradually, it's not that he didn't lose that realistic streak, but it wasn't as overt in the films that he did after that. In fact, the film that he did, the feature film he did after this, was The Gospel According to St. Matthew. And by the way, call this a minor addendum to the already lengthy Last Temptation of Christ rant. I said that The Passion of Christ is a good example of showing Christ in his humanity. But I also understand that that's not a film that most people like. I would put The Gospel According to St. Matthew as another example of a film that showcases Christ's humanity, but also doesn't do it in a very insulting, stupid way. It doesn't get into stupid theology in the way that The Last Temptation of Christ does. And interestingly enough, Scorsese thought about doing his own sort of biblical epic, and then he ended up seeing Pasolini's The Gospel According to St. Matthew, and he felt like, well, that's kind of already been done. So he does not. Again, Scorsese is a through and through cinephile, so he understands that he stands on the shoulders of giants. So at any rate, so I would say Mamma Roma, either Mamma Roma or The Gospel According to St. Matthew, or actually even Acatone is another one to kind of get you into the world of Pasolini. If you want to keep going, buyer beware. That's all I have to say at the moment. Now, this is where I get into a little bit of confession time. It's still been a while since I've seen Mamma Roma. I wanted to see it today, but for an assortment of reasons, I was just exhausted to not really get into it. But I'd seen it enough times to kind of know certain scenes and the feel for it, and there's definitely this kind of earthiness, but at the same time there's also this sort of soulful cry that you can kind of feel, especially when you feel like that there's really no hope for for either Mamma Roma or for her son Ettore. And there are also a few nods to Italian art, and that was another thing that Pasolini was really, really interested in. It was informed a lot by Italian artists, and so there's a little bit of homage to that. and yeah, it's you know it's very real and it's very melodramatic, and that's the best way to kind of sum up about it. So it's been a while since I've seen the feature, and honestly, the thing that I like about the DVD is that it includes a short film he did, and it was actually made right after Mamma Roma, but before the Gospel according to Saint Matthew, and that was La Bricata. And La Bricata was actually shown as part of an omnibus film called Rogo Rogopag. It's the name is derived from the initial letters of the four directors that show up. Rossellini is in there, Godard is in there, Gregoretti is in there, and then Pasolini. So he's the Pa in Rogopag. But La Bricata looks at this. The central character in that short is an extra in a film about Christ's Passion, and actually he plays the good thief, and his name is Strachey, and his constant struggle is to actually have a meal, and he never really has one, and even though everybody around him kind of mocks him for not having a meal, and I think it's the assumption that you just want more for yourself, you're just selfish, but it never really occurs to him that maybe he doesn't actually, maybe he's so poor that he can't afford to eat, and whatever food he gets, he has to give to his family and such. But anyway, so he's in this production of this production of that's supposed to be about Christ's Passion, but it's anything but. And actually, this film got Pasolini into trouble because it was presumed that you're just mocking the event, even though he makes it very, very clear that he has nothing but respect of that moment. For someone who proclaimed himself a Marxist and also a Catholic, it's always, that's the other thing about Pasolini, is that he likes to deliberately make things complicated, and so he embraces paradoxes and contradictions and so on within himself. But anyways, he loves the event itself, and in fact, and I can even see this, the point of the short is to show that there are people who say they give respect to it, but when you really, really think about it, they don't. And what I find very amusing about it is the production itself. You don't feel like there's any kind of reverence there at all. It's focused in the wrong ways, and probably the best example of this, it's predominantly black and white, but there's a few moments where color is involved, and it's supposed to be a kind of throwback to Italian Renaissance art. And you see the shot, and it's well composed, like you find in traditional crucifixion paintings and Piazza paintings and so on. But so the shot is set up, and everybody is told to remain still as this is being filmed, and so you see it set up, and the assistant director is yelling off camera. He says, like, "Okay, everybody in their places. All right, play the music." And then you hear this pop tune playing, and he goes, "No, no, no, you blasphemers! No, put the other one on." And then it's funny when you actually see it. Just take my word for it. It is quite amusing. And again, I don't find this offensive at all. In fact, if anything, it's a really good illustration of what happens when you don't take religion seriously, or when your heart's not really in it. And there's other examples of that. This is not a production filled with reverence, and I think that's one of the points that Pasolini wanted to make, is that you can, just because you're dealing with a solemn subject does not necessarily mean that you go into it with solemnity and reverence. In fact, quite the opposite. Another point he's making, and I do agree with this, is that there's those who practice, who claim to be Christian, they don't necessarily act Christian. And particularly in regards to being merciful to the poor. And you think that that would be very important, to to be merciful to one another, just as your Father in heaven is merciful, and they're not. And so that's the other big thing you get. And so it's very amusing, and also very satirical in the right ways. There's a kind of sort of a dry, sardonic humor at play. Oh yeah, and the director is also played by Orson Welles, who actually, even though he was dubbed over. I mean, that's Italian film practice, post-sync dubbing. He actually does speak Italian and does it very, very well. And he also, his character reads one of Pasolini's poems, and actually the subject matter kind of reminds me of hauntology, a concept popularized by Derrida and then carried over by other other people, most famously Simon Reynolds and Leland Kirby, writer and musician respectively. And it was interesting to hear this poem and kind of think hauntology, but that's just my little association. So again, I'm sorry I didn't give this film the proper attention that it probably deserves, but I will say that if you want to know what Pasolini is about and you want to do it through the Criterion Collection, Mamma Roma is a good film to go to, and pretty much the only film to go to. Trilogy of Life was released late last year, and that includes the Decameron, the Canterbury Tales, and Arabian Nights. And this is more later Pasolini, when he was ever so gradually pissing off more and more people, and then finally the ultimate piss off and fuck you comes through in Sallow. So I don't know unless you really, really like pissing people off, you can go with Trilogy of Life. If you're not into it that much, Mamma Roma is a good place to start. And it also includes La Briccata, and again, I really like that. In fact, that's usually the film I end up seeing the most, instead of the main feature. But again, it is a good introduction to Pasolini. And like I said before, if you want to go into Pasolini and you don't have to do it through the Criterion, or you don't feel like you have to do it through Criterion, Acatone or The Gospel According to St. Matthew is a good way to start. Hopefully it would be released through Criterion at some point, but who knows? I think I wanted it ever since 2004 or 2005, and it's already 2013. So I don't know if it's gonna necessarily happen. Probably not, but you never know. There are certain films that I thought would never appear, and they ended up appearing. So who knows? So yeah, Mamma Roma. And until next time, take care.